Welcome to Tuesday's Tips and Tools brought to you by the VSU Center for eLearning. Today we are going to look at how restrictions work in BlazeVIEW and how you can use these throughout your course. Many of you may already use these settings to set availability dates and for student accommodations, but today we want to dig into them a bit more. Some of these uses you may already be familiar with, but others may be new to you. First, options in the restrictions panel can be used to help with student accommodations and improving accessibility to content. If you're uncertain with how to set up accommodations for students, please contact the Center for eLearning. The Access Office can also assist you with any questions you may have regarding accessibility in your course. You can also create multiple versions of a quiz and use these settings in your restrictions panel to increase exam security. You can improve student engagement and depth of learning by creating small group discussions that then feed into the larger group. For hybrid or high flex courses that use multiple modalities, you can increase security and accountability for students using restriction settings. You can apply settings to help pace learners as they move through your course using self-directed activities. And for courses that include multiple levels, graduate and undergraduate, you can create split paths of progression applicable to the student's need. I'd like to offer up some tips for you when you're using the restriction settings. Despite the connotation of the name, the restrictions panel is for creating gateways to content, not walls blocking content. Remember not to create obstacles to your students' learning. Be mindful of your pedagogical purpose for setting restrictions options for content and assessments, and how these settings will impact a student's experience in your course in real life. Remember to account for technological and personal needs and limitations when setting up options on the restrictions panel. Some restrictions look very similar and may have similar effects, so be cognizant of the difference between the options and how they're meant to be applied in the course. When you have placed an assessment or discussion with restrictions into content, make sure you check your restrictions in both places so they are consistent. Always test the setting yourself using a student view to see how they're affecting the item you're working on. The question mark icon next to an option will give you more information about what that option will do. And the question we hear so often is, why can't the students see it? Usually this is because of the eye. Make sure the eye is open on items in your course or students will not be able to see it at all, no matter what restrictions you have set up. So next, let's compare the restrictions panel in the 3 assessment tools. All 3 tools have options for hiding visibility, setting due dates, setting availability dates, and release conditions. For availability dates, assignments are automatically added to the calendar if you have set a due date and/or an end date. But for discussions and quizzes, you have an option whether to add this to the calendar or not. This option is so that discussions that are ongoing or pop quizzes that you don't want students to know about can be set up to not display in the calendar. Assignments and quizzes both have settings for special access, but due to the nature of the discussion board, discussions do not currently have a special access section. Discussions do, however, have blocking options and group and section restrictions, which we'll look at when we look in it in BlazeVIEW. Quizzes have additional settings for test timing and additional test security. The restriction panel is not the only part of your course with these sort of settings. Content also offers settings for hiding visibility, setting due dates and availability dates, and release conditions. These settings can be applied across different types of content, whether it's modules and submodules, external learning tools, or activity and content within modules such as files or links. Content linked from other areas of the course, assessments, discussions, quizzes, can also have restrictions set within content. So make sure your settings for linked content is consistent in all locations. So now let's look at the restriction options within BlazeVIEW Learning Management System. First, let's look at the restrictions panel under assignments. At the top, you'll see you have hide from users. This is what's going to turn that eye on or off. Then you have a due date, an availability, start and end. If either the due date or the end date or both are set, this will automatically populate into your calendar. You have release conditions that you can attach, and you have special access, allowing only users with special access or users with special access that you list below. For the discussions restrictions panel, for either the topic or the forum, you have again hide from users. You have the availability start and end date, which you can display in a calendar. You have locking options to unlock, lock, or unlock for a specific date range, which again can be displayed in a calendar or not. And you have release conditions that you can apply. And then for this, you also have group and section restrictions that you can apply. Note the difference between the availability and locking options. Availability will limit the student's access to the discussion board, where locking it will allow them to read it but not post. The most popular restrictions panel would be for quizzes. Here you see again we have the hide from users. We'll hide the whole thing where they won't be able to see it at all. Due date. Here, availability, start and end date. They can see that there is a quiz, but they cannot see into the quiz. You can choose to display these dates in the calendar or not. We have release conditions that you can set for the quiz. You have security options, including lockdown browser. And remember our best practices advice for the lockdown browser. And please call if you have a question about that. Optional advanced restrictions include passwords. You can use a recommended time limit or an enforced time limit, and you can set special access, and you can use this both for accommodations and for the lockdown browser settings. For the content area, to set restrictions on your modules, you can click right below your title. Submodules work the same way, and you can add your start date, due date, end date. And for the hide for user, you have your eye, where you can make it visible or not to the student. Release conditions can also be created. And then for each activity, you have the same settings. You go to Edit Properties in Place, and you can again add date restrictions and release conditions. Please contact the Center for eLearning if we can help you with anything we've covered in this video or for any other assistance as you develop your courses.